You're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM, and this is Exploring Santa Cruz. My name is Jean Kratzer, and today's program is When Wildfire Comes to Santa Cruz.
Fire coming down the mountainside, I'll hear the wind chime sing all night. When the lights go out, neighbors are watching side by side. It's snowing ash in mid-July. When the stars go out, the timber's gone, but we are stronger than our fear. The homes we built are burning down to the ground, to the ground.
We've all seen the frightening videos of wildfires descending into California towns. We've heard that they're likely to become more frequent and more destructive. And we've been told that this is the new normal. What we've heard less about is that fire in California is normal. The California landscapes depend on fire. That Native Americans have a deep reverence for fire and an understanding that properly managed, fire enhances the health of the land, the plants, and the wildlife. By suppressing indigenous people and their wisdom, by suppressing fire itself, we have made fire our enemy.
You know, whenever we have a fire, a controlled burn, it serves a lot of purposes. My name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band. It's a very low-intensity fire, and it just kind of creeps along the ground. You know, we go through and we trim the branches, anything where it can give fuel to climb up the trees. We'll clip all that stuff down, and then we have the fire, and it just kind of crawls through slowly. But when it's going through slowly, it's killing the ticks, and the fleas and other pests like that in the ground. And then that smoke, when it goes up, I said that, you know, whenever we pray, we always, you know, we have fire and smoke. Well, this right here is a way of cleansing and blessing the trees. Because whenever that smoke goes up into the trees, it's smudging the trees, it's blessing the trees and cleansing the trees. And that smoke goes up and it chokes out the insects that are in the trees. And those insects fall down. And so now you have a much healthier tree there, particularly the acorns. We talk about historic trauma. Those trees had historic trauma. And this is a way of bringing spirituality back to the trees and back to the landscape. But those fires, they're so important, and they just creep along. And in the old days, our people, they would light landscapes. They can tell weather much better than we can today. And they knew if the rains were 2 days out or 3 days out, they said, well, we want 3 days of burns. And there it goes, the burns. And then they had certain kinds of burns for the medicine plants, for the food plants. We're working with the Klamath and the Yurok tribe now also sharing indigenous knowledge. You know, the guy picks up a leaf and he lights it. He goes, if you burn now, you're going to get a 4-foot fire. Another time, he goes, you burn now, you'll have a 2-foot fire. They just have that indigenous knowledge. It said that we're trying to get knowledge from our neighboring tribes, and that's the kind of knowledge that we're trying to bring back. You know, if we're going to restore these lands, and we believe the restoration of Mother Earth must be led by indigenous people, because only indigenous people have the moral authority. Creator gave us that obligation. The whole issue of climate change must be indigenous-led. We totally, firmly believe that. And we are working hard to provide that leadership. It's not going to be indigenous knowledge only. It's going to be blending the sciences with the indigenous knowledge, but it must be indigenous-led. We're working now on a very big grant request with UC Berkeley and state parks. And we want to do controlled burns as our ancestors did in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and have patches and segments where we would burn one segment each year and then come back and do it again. So it's going to be a long-term burn. And we're going to have a lot of research beforehand on the impacts on the birds and the wildlife and the insects, post-burn and after burn as well.
The thing that makes Bonnie Doon and the Santa Cruz Mountains unique is an ecosystem that depends on fire to sustain itself.
Joe Christie, president of the Bonnie Doon Fire Safe Council, a community nonprofit that has been constructing miles of fire breaks along the narrow roads and the ridge lines of Bonnie Doon.
Most people think what they're seeing is sort of the natural vegetation, but the fire history of these mountains is significantly different before and after Europeans arrived, because the Native Americans who'd lived here for millennia understood that fire is a useful tool for a lot of things. You can use it to open up meadows. The coastal prairies that are so beautiful along the coast only exist because they were burned off and were burned off regularly. During the pre-European era, California had far more wildfires than it does now, far more fires and wildfires because of Native American burning. And it amounted to about 5 or 6 times as much would burn regularly in an average year as, for example, burned last year. In California, virtually all of our ecosystems are fire adapted. Over the millennia, they have become adapted to fire. For example, most of the native trees around here and in the Santa Cruz Mountains are re-sprouters. They'll burn to the ground, or if you cut them down, they'll sprout again from the roots. More importantly, though, here in Bonnie Doon and in much of the Santa Cruz Mountains, we have plant communities like the redwoods, like the chaparral around here, that requires fire in order to sustain itself and to remain vigorous. In the redwoods, it thins out under layers so there's less competition for the water, helps prevent diseases. And the chaparral, a significant number of the plants in the chaparral, that's sort of the brushy stuff you see around up in the mountains. Also, this coastal scrub is another fire-requiring community. They're what is known as obligate seeders. They only reproduce from seeds. They don't resprout, but their seeds need to have fire in order to germinate. They need to be exposed to some of the chemicals in smoke and ash. That's also the case with these knobcone pines that we see around here. Those also require fire for their cones to open up. So they live for about 50 or 60 years. Then they start to senesce and die of their own, and typically what happens then is there'll be some ignition and they'll burn vigorously. The cones will all open, like after the Lockheed fire here. They live primarily naturally along ridgetops where there's poor soil. So there were these ridgetops which were just bare bowls of knobcone pines with the cones attached to the bowl have opened up, and the ground underneath them about 3 months after the fire was just carpeted knobcone pine seeds, and then about a year later it looked like a lawn, all the little seedlings. When gold was discovered, that was the beginning of urbanization in California. That led to about a century to a century and a half of fire suppression. Fire was viewed as a danger, as deleterious to the forest environment, and it was a waste of natural resources. And then after about 50 years of that, the fuel load had built up so much that there started to be large wildfires that would cover very large areas. A typical Native American burn would be anywhere from 10 to 100 acres. So now we're seeing fires of thousands of acres, and in 1912, there was something called the Big Blow-Up, where a significant portion of western Montana and the Idaho Panhandle caught fire, and there was a fire that lasted for a couple of weeks and basically destroyed millions of acres of timber. It was so hot and so intense that it destroyed those forests. In order to put it out, the federal government at the time sent the Army to help put it out, and that was the beginning of the Forest Service to try and understand how to manage forests and specifically to put all wildfires out by 10 o'clock the next morning. So after a century of that, fuel load was appallingly great, and we're still seeing the consequences of that.
The fuel load was appalling, and we're still seeing the consequences of that. So what can we do now?
Wildfire raging through our town. The sheriff says we gotta get out. I can't believe it's real. Man on his rooftop praying songs. Our men on the mountain all night long with nerves of steel. Shake the pictures off the walls, save all you can. Call your folks and let them know we're okay. We'll be okay.
My name's Abby Young, and I live in Santa Cruz in Prospect Heights neighborhood. I've been here for 20 years, enjoyed being near De La Viega County Park. But in 2017, when the Napa-Sonoma fires happened, I was extremely concerned and agitated, had friends there, watched the fire come up to their front doors, and I realized we were in a similar situation, and not only that, because of climate change, that it was increasing. So at a community meeting with city officials, the fire chief, then Jim Frawley, threw out a challenge to say we have a program called Firewise, which engages communities to make their homes more defensible for fire and give you preparedness tips and helps you empower one another to protect your homes and your neighborhood. And Santa Cruz did not have one of those. Marin County was a leader and a model in this because they had taken the 2017 fires very, very seriously. They had started Firewise groups. They had 33 now in Marin County and growing, but Santa Cruz had none. And so a few neighbors and I got together and said, well, we should at least start learning about this and figuring how to protect our homes and engage our neighbors. Firewise is a national program, and they have a wonderful website. And so we went there, and then as a result also spoke with the fire department and the city and realized that we could be partners with them in teaching ourselves and teaching our community about fire readiness. I began thinking about if we're the only group in Santa Cruz, that's not really going to address a lot of the other neighborhoods that are on the wildland-urban interface. And I made contact with several people, one of whom has started a group on Highland Ave on the west side. And they're working on a group in Paradise Park that had a fire last year. Not the Paradise that had the big fire, but our Paradise Park. And there are other groups on the west side off of Western that are trying to start their own groups because they're exposed to ravines and open fields. So many different vegetation situations, but we understand from the ensuing fires, not just 2017, but now 2018, and then the upcoming fire season, we have a drastically different climate in front of us, and we have to be prepared for things that haven't happened before. Vegetation management, fuel reduction, that means clearing out the brush and leaves and wood around homes and in the parks that are just adjacent to homes. The Civilian Conservation Corps has done a fabulous job. They just got 13% more funding from the governor. Wonderful young people who clear vegetation and maintain the fuel breaks. They just finished several weeks of brush cutting in De La Viega Park along the frontage road, and we feel a lot safer as this fire season approaches. But the other group in Highland has Pogonip that is adjacent to their land. The one western has big open fields adjacent to their land. Arana Gulch has fields and high forest. So the challenge that was initially launched by Jim Frawley was to start one group. I think we should have at least 15 in town. And that's just the beginning, because these are all community and volunteer efforts which bring neighbors talking to neighbors and help you clean up your house, so that if your neighbor's catches on fire, you've also helped your neighbor, and that will protect the larger community. But also what I've realized is that the city and the county need to be talking to each other more. We have a lot of work to do, and the wonderful thing is there's a great model in Marin County. They have done all this already. I've been in touch with the Marin County group. They want to work with us and support us.
Could you explain, if people listening decide, wow, that's a good idea, but I would have no idea how to get started on all of this, and especially when you talk about funding. I mean, funding is always the last thing that people are going to say yes to. So how do we get started, and how do we join with your group and other groups to try and expand the circle of people working on this?
That's a great question. The good thing about Firewise, back to community volunteer effort, is there's no cost, no charge. My sense is to stay organizing Firewise groups is a way to get the attention of potential funders. We can organize ourselves. 2 or 3 people who are concerned about too much vegetation, too much fuel on the ground. There's a wonderful site, nfpa.org, National Fire Protection Association.org, is where the Firewise program is based online. They have great information, brochures, pamphlets, and a description of how you can apply to be a Firewise community. There's no requirement for it, no payment for it, and the National Fire Protection Association wants to help. Robert Young is the new fire marshal, and his stated role is to educate communities about assessing your home for fire danger, how to create a Firewise group. The 2 Firewise groups have already started, the leaders are willing to talk with anybody who is also interested. We support each other because this is the way we will get through the coming years. We need to educate one another about new ways of preventing wildfire and also protecting our homes.
And I can imagine someone saying, if Santa Rosa or Paradise had had Firewise groups, would that have saved them? Would that have made a difference?
That would have made a significant difference. What would have made even bigger difference would be to have had the Firewise groups organized and connected to the city agencies or the state agencies that would have then been managing the fuel, to have been also connected with the utilities that would have managed their own repair and construction. So Firewise is a way to educate ourselves about safety in our own neighborhoods. It's not big enough to handle a forest fire once it gets going, but it teaches us how to prevent it from getting going and how to work with agencies that are existing and how to join forces with all of them so that those factors that all kind of converged in Paradise, PG&E had not maintained their poles, the forest had been overgrown, the homes had not had defensible space prepared around them, a whole variety of factors that you learn about in Firewise, and then you connect with others in your own neighborhood to make your neighborhood safe, and then you connect beyond that in larger circles to the city and county and state. One thing I do know about Paradise is that where there were homes that had created what they call defensible space. That means there's a 5-foot radius, has a certain degree of cleared from any debris, and then at 30 feet there's another clearing you need to do, and then at 100 feet you need to have clearing, so that near your house there wouldn't be any brush or wood that could be flammable. 30 feet away there could be trees that were spaced. 100 feet away there could be more density. But the point being that the homes would have less flammable material. And the homes that had done this in Paradise, some of those were saved for 2 reasons. One, because the fire had a way of operating that sometimes just miraculously it would skip a house, but if there was less that could catch fire on that house, that gave it more of a chance. Also, if firefighters in that situation found a home that had been maintained or defensively, the firefighters would opt to save that home over one that had nothing done to it, so that if you had taken preventive measures beforehand, you might have had a chance at that point to had an accumulation of firefighters to protect it. Still, that fire moved so fast that there were so many things undone, and that's what we have to be proactive about now, to get those done now so they don't pile up and converge as they did in Paradise. What this is, it's building a network of relationship in this very new and very changed time. We can't pretend it's not going to happen again. We have to imagine the things that have been unimaginable before. But Marin County is leading the way. They've done this terrific report, which is online, and at marincountyfire.org. And it shows how proactive they've been in just 2 years, and that they've made a huge difference. And we can do that too. We're ready to be part of the solution. One thing that is possible and that I'm planning to do very soon is ask the fire marshal to come out and do a series of home assessments in which they will look at all the things that are potential hazards. A lot of those are just simple things we don't think about. Not necessarily your landscaping, but do your gutters have pine needles? That's a huge way that fire travels, especially with what they call ember cast, because the heated embers from an exploding tree can travel up to a mile, and they land in a gutter that has pine needles and leaves, and you have instant ignition, and then it goes from house to house. That's why cleaning gutters is important. One thing I learned about from the fire marshal was that my house has vents under the roof called soffits, and they should have mesh in there because the embers enter inside the home. Many of the homes from Paradise burned from the inside out. That's a hard thing to believe, but the embers went through the open vents into the homes, and then the homes combusted inside. So a second thing to do is to put mesh screen on your vents under your roof. I have to do that. So there are simple things like that to do, first of all. Then you can deal with maybe having the fire marshal come out, look at several houses on your block, give you suggestions. No, you don't have to cut everything down, but certainly there are more fire-resistant plants. There are reasonable ways to landscape with composite material, and you don't just want a whole stack of wood up next to your house. So sensible things first, and then aesthetic things can be worked with.
And finally, I asked Santa Cruz Fire Chief Jason Hayduke for his view of Firewise groups.
Firewise program is a nationally recognized program, and it gets down to that community level engagement where people can make a really big difference within their communities for the impacts of fire, and it gives them the tools to do that. And for us, we always want to engage in the community and give them the tools that they can use separate from us responding for an incident that's happened. With the threat of wildland fire being elevated, that wildland risk become real in communities where that was not part of their everyday reality. And so what Firewise does is it engages the neighborhoods, which has a lot of other collateral benefits as far as neighborhood engagement, knowing who your neighbor is, knowing what their needs are, but collectively doing those actions within their neighborhood that makes their entire community safer. If everybody does vegetation management in the same manner, at the same time, that entire neighborhood, that entire community is safer because of that, versus one person doing the right thing and 10 other people in the neighborhood not doing that maintenance and having an ember or a fire start that spreads within that neighborhood. So what I like about Firewise, besides the wildland fire impacts, is the fact that we have neighborhoods coming together, talking, knowing who their neighbors are, looking out for one another, and engaging in that kind of neighborhood dialogue that I think in this day and age has been replaced with online interactions versus human interaction. And so for the Firewise, you can go online, we have the pamphlets, and you can look at it and have those step-by-step things that you can do in what sequence and what importance to make your home and your community safer. So for me as a fire chief, it gives me the tools to go leave with somebody, to engage them. And when I walk away, I'm not taking those tools with me. I'm leaving it with them. And so they know what they can do to make their home safer.
And If the communities do organize into Firewise groups, and there's a great deal of work that needs to be done, will they have the benefit of any additional resources that could come in as a result of organizing as a group?
So there's the primary responsibility of someone who has a house in their neighborhood to maintain that to a certain standard, and that's for their own benefit as well as their neighbors. The benefit I see from the Firewise groups is giving those tools. There's the visual aids, there's the written documents about the clearance zones, 0 to 5 feet, 5 to 30 feet, and up to 100 feet. But to answer your question, what benefits there are, Firewise allows you to track your hours, which gets converted into a dollar amount. And depending on the program, you can say that we are a collective group, not a single individual, making a benefit for the whole versus just the individual. And usually grants are written not for someone's individual benefit, but they're for a community. And so when those grants become available, you have a formalized program that's recognized, that's supported by the jurisdiction that you're within from the fire department, saying we support their efforts because it's in line with the national standard and they're following a process that's recognizable, and we can quantify the number of hours and what that dollar amount is that can be in lieu or matching funds for a grant. Versus just one person applying for a grant. A neighborhood is saying, look, this is an overwhelming problem. We can't do it by ourselves. We need help. And here's a mechanism to do that. There are a number of grants that nonprofits can put in for. And if you can form a Firewise group, you could be viewed in that same manner as a neighborhood association or a nonprofit. And specifically, what we're trying to do is make those neighborhoods more resilient so that we don't have an impact to the rest of the community. So if you have a Firewise group within your neighborhood and you say, we need to maintain this property so that we have defensible space, but also so that we don't have a fire that starts here and spreads into the community, it makes the rest of the community safer.
Rain coming down the mountainside, I'll hear the wind chimes sing all night.
Thank you for listening to Exploring Santa Cruz. The song Wildfire was by singer-songwriter Brittany Jean. KSQD, Santa Cruz. K-Squid, 90.7 FM and ksqd.org on the web.